Measure Z committee meeting of Thursday, January 25th, 2024. And if you could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sorry, I started a minute early.
Sure did.
I'm sorry. I waited. Okay. And if we could have a roll call?
Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. Ms. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Cole?
Present.
Ms. Campbell?
Here?
Ms. Trent?
Here.
Chief Robertson?
Here.
Sheriff?
Here.
Mr. Zemer?
Yes.
Ms. Long?
Here.
Mr. Bronco?
Here.
And Ms. Titus?
Here.
All accounted for.
Okay, great. So I would like to know if there are any modifications to the agenda that anybody has? No? And is there a public? No? Okay. So we'll just accept it and as it is. And is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Is there anybody in Zoom?
No, Chair Campbell, there's not.
Okay, is there anybody in the audience? Okay, seeing none, we will move forward. And so, excuse me. So we need to look at the action summary. And are there any, is there an approval? Does anybody have any comments on the action items?
A motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Are there any comments? No? Is there any public comment?
No, there's nobody on Zoom. either.
Okay. So should we have a roll call vote or just a up and down?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Okay.
All right, and I'll start over on this side. Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Ms. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer? Sheriff?
Yes.
Chief Robertson?
Yes.
Ms. Trent?
Yes.
Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
And Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Okay, so are you gonna, do you want to introduce Tracy?
Yeah, if we go ahead and just move to item 2, I'd like to introduce Tracy D'Amico. She is the clerk of the board, and she has an update for this committee on Brown Act and related issues.
Hi, I'm Tracy. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for volunteering. This is a thankless job, and you do not hear enough how important it is and how, you know, your volunteerism helps sustain the county in so many different functions. So thank you for being here and the hard work you do. It is very relevant. So part of the clerk of the board's function is we manage the boards and commissions that the boards of supervisors appoints to. And there's currently, I think, 27, and you are one of the higher disclosure and important ones because you are making financial decisions. Even though you are advisory, it does come with a little more liability as far as following procedure, protocol, and completing all of your information that the FPPC requires. So you're all been seated here for a while, and most of you have other interactions that give you a lot of experience in meetings, what you can and cannot do. And so this is just a little reminder for you all, because I know you're all well trained and follow all the rules and guidelines. So if we just look at the summary for the boards and commissions, this is something that we share with all of our committees. We try to hit everybody once a year if we can, just to remind them of some important things to keep you all out of trouble, because that's what we want for you, is to help you make sure that you're following the rules and guidelines so that you don't get complaints and fines. So the Brown Act was established for transparency, as you know, for the public to participate and see what's happening in government, to make sure that everything, all the decisions and advice and procedures are being followed. There's several types of meetings, and this would be a regular meeting, special meetings, emergency meetings, all have different rules and regulations, and if you aren't sure, you can reach out to somebody and find that information out. What is not a meeting is anything that's a workshop, a social event, someplace where you all can be present and enjoying yourselves, learning, socializing, as long as you're not discussing any of the Measure Z business at that event, because that would be a violation. You're your own police, but unfortunately, there are other people out there policing you as well. And so you just want to be mindful of that when you are at social events or trainings or workshops. Some of the other rules is public comment. You can ask people to state their name for the record, what district they're in, what they're representing, but they do not have to share or disclose that. They are allowed to be here and say whatever they choose to say. So you must not conduct a meeting that is inaccessible. So you guys meet here, we meet all of the status and quotes. We got the sheriff's sign of occupancy up there so we don't violate. People can come in, they can record, they can take notes, they can set up their tripod and video you all, and that is part of their rights. As long as they're not disruptive, it's allowed. All votes must be made in public, and because you all don't use the iPad or the iLegislate like our board, roll call vote so that it's on the record and recorded is what we require. Just because a show of hands, if you're not being on Zoom or in a recording, people might get confused or not understand who's voting which direction. So we ask that you make a roll call vote for the public to hear. If documents are distributed in the meetings, such as these that I distributed, you also have to present them to the public for anybody in the audience so that you're all sharing the same information, because we don't want them to think that you're passing notes or have secrets up on the dais. Let's see, what else? Some other quick things is the agenda. You're only allowed to discuss what's on the agenda. The chair, it's your responsibility to make sure that that's adhered to lead the conversation back to the conversation. You don't have county council representing you, so it really falls on you all to help control the conversation. If it's not on the agenda, you can't take an action on it, and you shouldn't even be discussing it. A lot of people get in trouble with that because it's easy to get in the weeds, and you just need to stay focused. One of the biggest offenders of the Brown Act that we see is the serial meeting, typically an email with a reply all. Be very mindful about that, because once you start doing that, you're all seeing the same information. It could bias your opinions. It could lead you to different conclusions. It's having a meeting without being present, so you can reply to one person, two people can discuss a topic, you can't share outside of that. Ginger and Tammy can't say, well, I know where I stand, let's capture Billy, and Ginger can't say, Tammy, Billy thinks this, because now you're breaking the Brown Act. So just being mindful about who you're speaking to and what you're speaking about. And lastly, just a quick little reminder that you can be penalized, and that we've had it happen for people on boards and commissions. Measure Z is a hot topic. You guys are popular because you're making financial decisions. So just make sure that you comply, that you, in your best ability, are acknowledging the rules. People make mistakes. If you have questions, you can reach out to council. Because you are a board-appointed commission, you have access to county council for advice. So if there's ever a question, if you're not sure, if someone does file a complaint to you, that is your right as an appointed member to reach out to county council, and we at the clerk of the board's office can help you, put you in touch with the right representative in that department. So along with the Brown Act, the FPPC also is the enforcers of your favorite Form 700s every year, annually. And it's when you're taking office, leaving office, and then annually. You have a high disclosure because you're making financial decisions, so it's critical that you return these and you fill them out every year. We've tried to improve our process. We're trying to go electronic. We're trying to do a lot of those things, but we are 3 staff members for all of those. And so we're not quite there yet, so I do have to harass you by email to get a copy of those 700 forms. really, it's protecting you. And it is a little bit difficult because they are public disclosed forms. They are, they fall under a different PRA approach. So if someone came into my office and asked for a public records request for all of the Measure Z Form 700s, I'm not protected by the 10-day rule of looking into those, of redacting information. I have to give them what I have at the time. So if you have not turned in your forms, that person will know then, and they can complain to the FPPC, and you can be penalized, or they'll reach out to you and make sure that you get those completed. So typically at the beginning of the year, I send you this little memo about your Form 700s, when I need them by, and then if you have any questions, FPPC guidelines and their website is very informative. The first, I think the most important page, I think it's page 7 on your forms, is just your personal information, what committee this is, and then you have to attach the disclosures that you feel are pertinent to this role. So if you own stock in an ambulance service, that is something that you have to disclose, because unfortunately, people then feel like you're hiding something and you're not being transparent, and that you're going to be getting some sort of capital gains from this decision that you're making. And so less is more. Less is more. It's easier to disclose more information, so it's there to keep you out of trouble. They're due by April 2nd, so you're going to get an email from me. And yes, I track them, and yes, I know who's turned them in for the last years. And we're going to try to start being better about helping you and enforcing that. The state requires that I, as the board's representative, ask you twice and can prove that I've asked you twice. And then if you do not submit, the penalty and the fault falls on you as board members. The Board of Supervisors can remove you from this commission if you do not submit your Form 700. They can everybody. And some counties do that. We don't have a lot of staff to really track the fine details. So currently what we do is we remind you twice, so that if you do get in trouble or if they're called to the curb on that, it falls on your responsibility. But what we would really like to do is to help you get those completed and on file. If you're not sure about how to fill this out, I keep everyone's. I have to keep them for 7 years. So you can reach out to me. I have them electronically scanned every year. So if you want to see what you submitted last year and copy and paste, great. But I have to have a wet signature, and I have to have a new signature with a new date for the new year. So that's with the 700 forms. And then also on this page is the ethics training, which is something that we just started initiating last year, is your request to do the ethics training. And that's AB 1234. I'm sure some of you have done it in your other capacities that you represent, cities and counties, et cetera. That is just your required every 2 years. It's online as well. It is a 2-hour training. And if you do not go 2 hours, it will not print you a certificate. If you currently have a certificate and have done your training, you can submit those to me, and I'll use the date on that certificate of training to then extend that 2-year period. We're going to start doing a tracking. So last year was the first year we introduced it. We gave everyone a little bit of grace. This year we're going to really start hammering about needing to complete that. Again, it's not that we don't have faith in you, it's that the public may not. And we just want to help you stay in the best possible light for everybody involved. And with that, if you guys have any questions, I've taken enough of your time. Don't
would
just
like to-
delete my emails. Yes.
Can I clarify the serial meeting? Because we
Sure.
are a board of 9, you said we can only talk to 2 people, but I believe that's more because we are a larger board than the 5 supervisors. Is that correct?
You're right. So I always say 2 because I work for the board,
Fine.
and I am
Okay.
also brainwashed on that. So it's easier to do the 2 rule, just because when you talk to 3, you don't know who that it gives you more opportunity for someone in that group to then go talk to someone. Now you're at 4. It's just caution. Yes, Glenn?
Did I understand you were saying that the ethics online course that we took last year is 2-year duration, so this year,
Your mic's not on, Glenn.
that the ethics course we took last year is a 2-year duration, so if we completed it last year, we do not need to complete it this year.
Correct.
Okay.
And if you have questions, and you know what I'll do is I'll just try to individually let you know, like when your completion date was and when it's coming up. We're trying to get an automated system, but between all of our boards and commissions, we probably have 150 individuals, and we just don't have a program that automatically updates all of that. So we're doing it the best we can process, so. Yes, Sheriff Hansel.
If you're on more than one board and you fill out a Form 700 form, I mean, do you have to do it for every board that you're on?
So typically you do, but what you can do is just change the cover sheet to, on that one page I was telling you about that's so pertinent, it has a space for asking you what commission you're sitting on. If you wrote Measure Z on that one, all of your disclosures from other boards and commission, you can just attach those, and it covers you. So I would like my own face sheet, please.
Yes, perfect.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay. Back to the agenda. Okay, so we are going to have a review of the recent county developments, a report on the Board of Supervisors actions. Sean?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really quickly, before we talk about the board's actions from this past Tuesday, I wanted to update the committee. Right now, the county is in the process of developing its legislative platform. On Tuesday, we're going to bring that full document to the board. The legislative platform is an expression of legislative priorities of the board, and we present that to our state and federal delegation, our elected representatives. And we ask for them to either introduce bills or help advocate on our behalf. It also allows us to submit letters and hold meetings with different state and federal agencies to try to drive those priorities home. As part of that process, on January 19th, we met with Senator McGuire's staff to talk about the board's priority around EMS and fire service, specifically responding on state highways. Highway 299 was a big topic there. So we have talked to their staff and expressed our desire to find some sort of legislative fix, whether that's state funding, allowing us to tax commercial parcels to allow a bigger tax base for those areas. We'll see what happens there. I'll definitely keep this committee apprised if anything does happen. Also, 2 weeks ago, the County Administrative Office got approval from the Headwaters Fund to receive a $5,000 grant. We're going to contract with a firm called the Ferguson Group to help write a grant for Samoa Fire to hopefully purchase a fire truck. The Ferguson Group has a partnership with CSAC, our California State Association of Counties, where they offer discounted rates to rural counties, specifically for grant writing and advocacy and strategic planning services. They're going to go after a grant. I believe that has a deadline of later in February. So just wanted to make you all aware of that. That'll be a great way to help a local fire agency. And finally, earlier this week on Tuesday, the board held a meeting where some important decisions were made. Specifically, we took to the board your committee's recommendations on changes to the Measure Z process and your recommendations on what to do with the $5.4 million that is remaining in Measure Z's fund balance. I'm happy to report that the board heard the committee's recommendations loud and clear. They did allocate $1 million of that money to roads for obvious reasons, and they did decide to hold the funding from fiscal year 22-23, not allocated at mid-year, and hold that for your committee's recommendations in the coming year. That means that this committee has about $4.1 million to recommend for fiscal year 24-25. They also voted to make that an annual process. And I just cannot stress how big of a change this is and how important this is. Your committee has done a lot of work over the last year and a half, beginning from the moment that you all identified an issue, began several years ago, but specifically when you made recommendations on changes to the process. The board took a lot of action to deallocate positions, which does not happen typically, and they made an action to forego an opportunity that they have to allocate funding at mid-year, specifically to recognize the remarks and the opinion that this committee has. So as your committee told the board, this is a more fiscally sound approach. We are taking money that is in the bank and allocating it for the future. There's a small portion that we are using for projections, which is a revenue projection for the coming year, which is typical, in typical budgeting, but it is a significant action that the board took, and I want to commend this committee for the actions you all have taken, the work that you have taken over the last year plus to drive this process. This also reserves a significant portion of funding, not only for fiscal year 24-25, but it should allow this committee to have more funding in the coming years, preserving this committee's role to provide substantial recommendations regarding Measure Z.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any comments? Glenn, Sue, and then you.
If you could just clarify an item for me. At our previous meeting, we were talking about the carry forward and accumulation of funds being somewhere in the $3 million range. And then there was a 2.4 addition that appeared in the staff materials that went to the Board of Supervisors. If I understood your colleague in her presentation, some of that money was from salary savings and some of it was still recapturing money that was, let's say, unidentified or not able to be identified during the period that the auditor controller's position was in some flux. So are we at the point now where all of the arrears money that could be allocated to the period of flux, if you want to call it that, of the auditor controller's office has been identified and recovered, or is there going to continue to be drips and dribbles of that coming forward?
Well, I can't predict the future, but I would like to say that we are on a more stable area, or more stable ground for knowing how much funding we have. You're right. When I came to this committee last in December, I reported that there was about $3 million in salary savings from the prior year. That was due to positions not being filled because we didn't know if those positions were going to be allocated, deallocated, or not. Since that time, there's been an additional $2.4 million identified for Measure Z, and that is due to a one-time change in accounting process. What that is, and I'll see if I can translate this, is in prior years, we would look at revenue that we receive from July 1 to January 30, and that would be the revenue that would be available for Measure Z. However, standard accounting practices allow for a 60-day accrual. Activity that occurs in May and June, we don't receive that money until July and August. So under accounting practices, the activity that occurs in May and June, the revenue that we receive should be accounted back. So essentially, we receive funding revenues in July and August, and we accrue that back to May and June to the prior year. So essentially, that got accrued back for several years. So fiscal year 22-23 received 2 additional months of revenue, which is, if you do that for several years, that amounts to about $2.4 million. Does that make sense? But that should be a change in process that is going forward, and that helps align us with everybody else's, the industry standard of projections and accounting.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. The point of my question was, from the committee's perspective, the most valuable information, of course, is the salary savings and so on, because presumably, unless there are ebbs and flows in the staffing, that would be a relatively recurrent, revenue source. Whereas we would expect at some point that this catch-up accounting, if you want to term it that, would finally reach its terminus, and there would no longer be any of those types of funds, being forward. And so that's why I was curious if that catch-up accounting process is 50% complete, or 75%, or 100% complete, or we don't know how complete it is, or?
So, I mean, closing the books and that process has, for the most part, been standardized and is under control under the current auditor controller. We're still closing our books, and we're still behind in that process. But the way that we account for revenue, I would like to think we are in a good place. However, there are changes to accounting processes that come out every year from the state, and so I can't say that we're not going to incur any changes going forward. But I would like to think, for the most part, we can feel.
Yeah,
feel
thank
pretty
you,
good.
Glenn. Sue, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to thank those of you who attended the Board of Supervisors meeting in person and made your comments. I was attending by Zoom, and my office was just like a wild, I don't know what. And you guys all did a great job speaking to the supervisors, making your points. Everybody communicated very clearly, and yeah, I'm just so proud of all of you.
Oh, thank
and
you.
the staff report was excellent, and I was just really pleased that the Board of Supervisors saw the value in keeping this group and keeping us involved and not taking away, our basically what we were going to do, because I just got here and I don't want to sit here and work for nothing. So
Yeah.
I was just really pleased with the outcome of that meeting. You guys all did great.
Great, thanks, Sue. Glenn? I mean, Nick.
Sean, I just had a quick question for clarification. The Board of Supervisors identified $1 million for Public Works roads allocation. Is that in addition to the line item or the individual item that was already present in that budget? And what does that total look like?
It is in addition. So Public Works has one project that was funded last year, and that involves staff to do some brush cutting. And that line item is around, I think, between $300,000 and $400,000 a year. But this funding that was approved just on Tuesday was strictly for road maintenance. So Public Works total allocation should be north of $1 million, $1.5 million for this year. I don't have that exact number yet.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay.
One quick one, and we're still moving forward with the 3-year plan as far as funding fire and then funding the DTF officer and ambulance, correct?
That's correct, yes. So, and maybe I should have attached it to this agenda, but there's a $12.5 million spending plan that the board approved in December. That'll get finalized once we adopt the budget this year, and we'll get some contracts out. But there are 4 applications that are guaranteed to receive funding. Fire is going to receive around $1 million each year for the next 3 years, depending on our staffing costs that for the next couple of years. Kamau Ambulance will receive, I believe, is $320,000 a year. Fortuna Police will receive $200,000 a year for their DTF agent, and Star Ambulance will receive, I believe, $137,500 per year. Each of those 3 years through fiscal year 26-27.
Great, thank you. And so of this 4.1 million, that doesn't include the reserve that's going to be set aside.
That is correct.
So this is how much we have to play with.
That's correct.
Okay.
So and thank you for mentioning that. As part of their action, the board's actions on Tuesday, they accepted the committee's recommendation to reserve 16% of the funding that was available in fiscal year 22-23. So that's 16% of $5.4,864,000 is going to be put into a reserve line, and that'll be used to fund the projects that are in that 3-year spending plan. So if revenues dip, then that $864,000 is going to be available to make sure that those projects will receive funding, hopefully to at least get them up to a baseline.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so, oh, yeah.
Just for clarification, the 5.4 was the beginning, and then the million allocation to the roads would theoretically take our discretionary amount down to 4.4. Was the 16% going to be calculated off the 5.4 or the
Yes.
4.4?
5.4.
Okay.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, so we'll move on to the application updates. And this was a big job, thank you to the staff. We asked for, changes in the application process. So, do you want to talk about that, Sean? Do you want to bring it up?
Sure, yeah. There's 3 different attachments that are attached to this item. Recommendation number 1 is asking this committee to approve the application, the updated application, and the updated quarterly reporting form. Attachment 1 contains the fiscal year 24-25 application. Question number 6 on the application talks a little bit about funding sources regarding an agency's sustainability approach to make their Measure Z project sustainable in the absence of Measure Z funding. It does not talk specifically about the funding that they have pursued in prior years or what they're going to pursue in the current year. I'm going to mention that when I get to attachment number 3. I will mention that the application has a submittal date of February 17th, and I think that we should probably change that, considering that this application is going to be released likely tomorrow, and so I would recommend about a 4-week turnaround. So I think we had talked about February 23rd.
I think if you don't mind, I'm going to ask,
Sure.
Nick has the whole list of dates we kind of discussed about. The 17th is a Saturday too, so on top of that, we needed to change that. So,
Yeah, and especially in light of the kind of the extended process we had to take to get the feedback from the board. I'd really like to see the applications due no later than the 23rd of February, and then have our board receive those applications on the 7th of March to begin our process.
So our first meeting to start deciding about the money would be the following week, which is March
Which would be,
the 14th.
let me make sure I'm saying the right dates.
I think it is.
Thursday, I'm sorry, yeah, March 7th, and then we would start our ranking process on the 14th.
On the
of March.
14th. So most likely, we'd be done by the end of March with all of that. So if you could,
I
But-
got confused, sorry. Applications due February 23rd. We meet on March 14th. What's March 7th?
March 7th is when we receive the applications.
Okay,
And the public can view them too. It's
okay.
it's always public. Pardon me?
It's a meeting.
Oh, it's a meeting, yeah. Right? Yeah. Yeah, first review of, we'll be receiving them, discuss what we want to, how we want to proceed. Probably won't be a 2-hour meeting, and then we'll meet the following week.
Okay.
And it'll be every Thursday until we get it done. Hopefully by the end of March. Okay, thank you, Sean.
And so just to continue, attachment number 2 is an example of the staffing audit. Your committee had talked earlier this year, I think back in May, for the desire to have agencies report on which positions have been filled and for how long. And so attachment 2 is an example of what we could ask agencies to fill out on their quarterly report, and then an annual version of that form would be included in the application. And attachment 3 is an updated version of the quarterly report. Question number 7 on that attachment speaks directly to the question about the efforts that agencies have taken to pursue additional funding.
Could you read that? Or I can, just so it's on record.
Yes. So question number 7 on attachment number 3, the updated quarterly report, reads, describe the efforts your agency has taken to seek other funding for this program. This includes grants you have applied for and/or received, legislative requests, fee creation / updates, et cetera.
Thank you, because the other agencies that have always done this will have to have that on theirs. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, are you done?
Yeah, and so I was just hoping to get any other feedback on the application, if there's any additional information that you want to include. I will say we might want to hold off on approving that until we discuss the recommendation number 2, which is about allowable costs, because depending on what this committee wants to do, it might affect the application. So,
Okay, so
if that's
we'll
all right
wait.
with you, Chair.
We'll wait on that.
Okay.
So do you want to cover that? Yes.
Given the change in our process and the fact that some of these applicants are likely to have some historic experience with us, would it be worthwhile to put a note on each of the applications that was distributed indicating the process has changed and there will now be a single unitary award once a year so they don't think they're going to experience what they have historically? So just some sort of note indicating the process has changed, and you should be aware that any award made by the committee, yada, 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 will be the sole process in this year and subsequent years?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, we can absolutely do that, and we can definitely include that in the press release announcement that we put out as well.
Right, and it's not that we make any recommendations at mid-year, right? So it would have to be carefully worded so that it's the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can't say that we are only going to do this once a year because, so just so that they're clear.
Yeah, just so they're clear that there now is a once-a-year process.
Yeah.
And they should not expect a second round of potential funding, at some point in
Yeah.
the future.
Okay. Okay, so do you want to go over recommendation number 1?
Yeah, the recommendation number 2 was in regards to a conversation and action taken by this committee. You all have expressed a desire to have more discussion and potentially limit some of the costs and expenses that are being funded through Measure Z. Specifically, I believe you have talked about overhead costs and administrative costs, but also wanting to get more granular on some of the equipment that's being purchased and goods that are purchased with Measure Z funds. And so in my staff report, I talk a little bit about some of the indirect costs and overhead costs that are, how those costs are regulated in common state and federal funding sources that we're familiar with. Just quickly in summary, federal awards, they allow for an indirect cost rate if agencies have one established. That can be up to, I've seen 25+%. They also allow for a 10% overhead for agencies that don't have indirect cost rate established. Small agencies, it takes a lot of work to submit the paperwork to different federal agencies. And so the federal government allows a 10% de minimis overhead charge, and that applies to administrative costs or costs that aren't directly applicable to a program but are necessary for the program to be run. So things like payroll charges, IT charges, purchasing, procurement, things like that. So that's one approach that your committee could consider. We've also seen on, as I noted in the staff report, some state grants have that number significantly reduced. We've seen as low as 5% for some recent grants. But that's something that this committee can talk about wanting to have included in the staff report, or in the application, I'm sorry. whether it's a 5% or a 10% allowable overhead to put in these applications.
Okay.
And really quickly, secondly, on allowable equipment charges, costs, this is a kind of a difficult nut to crack, and I haven't seen really strong approaches to this. What I did see in some federal grants are agencies requiring people who apply to detail the equipment that they're going to buy and provide a written explanation of why that equipment is necessary for this project that they're funding. So we can work on that and ask agencies or require agencies to provide a little bit more detail. Can be tough, especially with agencies like fire agencies who their entire application is all typically all equipment. But there are definitely some other projects that have less equipment that we could probably get a little bit more granular and ask for more explanation on why agencies are applying for certain funding.
Does anybody have any comments on that, Sue?
So would we add that as part of our application?
Yes.
Okay, so we would add that.
Yeah.
And then I have another question on the application. Number 3, it says, is this application a renewal or related to a project that has been funded, blah, blah, blah? They're not all projects, right? Should we change that to a project or agency?
They are all, project is not a term that's really defined in our process, but they are all projects in the sense that each application is a project in and of itself. So for tuna, for example, the DTF agent we consider a project. The school resource officer is considered a separate project.
Okay,
So that's kind of the meaning behind that.
okay, thanks.
Okay, are there any more comments?
I would find I would be agreeable to putting a percentage cap on a combined cost of both overhead and administrative as a combined item. I don't have a specific percentage in mind, and I would like to see if there's a support for that. I think that's something we could work out.
Go ahead, Sean.
I don't know if you can help add some clarity. I think part of our concern, at least that I recall, is there was no standard for what constituted overhead or admin costs, so we would see a wide variety of that in our applications. For example, we would see full payroll costs, the full roll-ups for one position from one applicant, and we would only see salary or base salary for another. I don't feel like a 10% admin overhead addresses that at all, but I guess the deliberation is how far into the weeds do we want to get here? And I think in those discussions, what we came up with, if you feel strongly that that's not appropriate, then vote no, and we'll let the process work it through. But I don't necessarily, I appreciate all the work, and I haven't looked at the specific DOJ link to get more information, and I would like to do that. But yeah, I'm not sure if, especially with the changed process, that should be way more efficient if we need to get that far into the weeds on changing our application. Thanks.
So I will, to that point, I will say that the overhead or administrative costs do not include benefits. So salary and benefits would be something that would be detailed, and then payroll costs in the sense of the part of an agency, a payroll department, their costs, not a PERS cost. PERS costs are included in benefits, if that makes sense.
And I think that was always the problem, is that, like you said, we'd get one application that had the entire, cost, and another one that just had a little bit, and we didn't really know how to deal with that. So is this something we need to vote on this recommendation, or are these recommendations we already voted on last time?
I'm looking for this committee to approve the application as presented or as modified, what we talked about with the dates.
Okay, Billy.
Thank you. On the application, we talked about equipment and getting more specific on the equipment, especially with fire and some of the other agencies. I think that may be a slippery slope. And I would like a question here, as far as if money is being used for equipment, how does the purchase of this equipment fit in with the Measure Z purpose and vision? And if you're replacing this equipment with, because of outdated, it would be good to know that as well. This is a replacement, this is, there's failing equipment, something of that nature, so we know exactly what they're looking for. I think that would be good. But I agree with Chief Robertson that, as far as the overhead costs and those kind of things, the roll-ups and payroll, we're going to be scrutinizing these applications pretty closely, and I feel like if someone includes too much in there, that we may not approve that application. So we want people that want to push this forward as much as possible, and then as well as there's existing, the county applications have gone through and that kind of stuff, and as far as sheriff's deputies, and we can only charge so much per deputy, and there's costs that we're not capturing through Measure Z. And so if we're going to make an accommodation for new applications, we should reflect that with the current funding for Measure Z as well. So
it should be standardized,
across the board.
the way we do it,
Yeah.
for county and for,
And then one change on the application, let's spell Talon Titus's name right in the header.
And there are parts, I think I have the Ginger there as acting chair.
Yeah.
And I don't have Ms. Trent as the vice chair, so I can make those changes as well.
Perfect.
I have one thing, maybe one thing I might try to add to the discussion. Rather than setting a percentage allocation, what about creating a question within the application that specifically says, what is the amount of overhead and administrative costs that you are allocating within this application? So it's very clear
Yeah.
to ourselves and to the public.
I like that. Bob?
Two items. The first one being that perhaps above question number one, the amount of Measure Z funding requested, that we might want to suggest adding in a statement, the estimated amount of funding available for allocation in 24-25 is, and then put the blank in so that applicants have an understanding of the total available funding that's out there, so that someone doesn't submit an application requesting more than what's available. The second one ties into the different categories of funding that we're seeing being requested. And I'm wondering if there should be something similar to question 2, where things are listed such as staffing, materials, overhead, just the different categories that people are requesting funding for, so there's just an easy way to look at the application and see what those different categories someone's seeking funding for might be.
So it would be a convenience for us.
Correct.
It's not a clarity for them.
Correct.
Okay.
It's just meant to know that,
Right.
this application's for personnel, or it's for materials.
Or everything.
Keep checking away.
All. Okay, thank you. Sue?
I like the idea of the administrative part being listed out, because it's hard to take a percentage, because if you say it 10% and we were giving away $1 million, is it really $100,000 to do whatever it is they need to do? Or if we give them $2 million, then that's $200,000. So I like the listing it out so that we can actually see it and we can decide if we think
Yeah,
that's-
they would put it in what
Yeah.
it is. I like that. Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else have any comments? Tom?
I have an idea to simplify and capture everything we've just talked about, but maybe I'm simplifying my perspective on that. Is it seems like all of the details we want could just be in the budget. And so you could say, fill out the budget according to the specific items, and then just be more specific with that, and say something like, if you don't fill out this in detail, then your application may be rejected. Would that satisfy everybody's concerns?
I think functionally, yes, but part of my intention was creating something very clear also for the public. So if the public looks at the application, they don't have to get into the details of their line item asks to see where the money, what the intent of the application is. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I feel like it's making the applications way more complicated. And we either serve the public who wants to review it, or we're serving the applicants. And I feel like our primary objective is serving the applicants. The quarterly reports should fulfill the public's concern or transparency, I would imagine.
Right, I like it. Also, continually every year, people will say, "See attached," and that just drives me nuts. You know, it's like, and they give us something that was given to somebody else, and we have to dig through it to find out what we need. So is there some way to say in there, please do not include anything with the word "see attached," or the chair will lose her mind? No, it's just, it's hard, because then you have to dig through, you know, and then when I've talked to people about it, and they say, well, we just wanted to give you everything. We just felt like we wanted to let you know what was going on. Yeah, but we don't need all of that. It was hard to dig through all of that.
And are you talking specifically about the quarterly reports that come in?
No, the applications, actually. A lot of times on the applications, you know, we'd ask a question, they'd say, "See attached, see attached." Some of the applications in the past have been quite hefty. So it's better if they just fill out what we have, I think. It's easier for me. Yes.
I can see that being a problem if, well, I'll use the fire department for an example. If they have, you know, list of a bunch of different stuff that might not fit.
I understand that. I'm just saying that they'll give us a bunch of writing, you know, like something that they've applied somewhere else, and they just attach that to ours. So maybe not the listing of the specific stuff they need, but in the narrative, you
So
know.
if they're filling out the application and there's not enough space in that, can they put "see attached"?
What did we have? We had some rule about that, didn't we, last year or not?
Yeah, we've done the online fillable applications where we don't want people to submit 4 pages of narrative, and we talked about having some kind of a limit on how much people can place within the specific fields for the narrative. We also have this attachment that is just a Word document that people can fill out. And we've talked about limiting those to, I think, the total application to, I think, 2 pages before we get into the attachments for equipment and budget.
Yeah, attachment for budget and equipment would be fine, but the narratives they go on, and it's difficult to read through it. Okay, are there any other suggestions? Is anybody opposed to the suggestions that were made?
I also wanted to, as part of this agenda item, your committee in May, I mentioned in the discussion, made a recommendation to have a portion of our process allow for the committee to recommend partial applications, recommend partial funding for applications. And I'm proposing that be an action that you take during the voting process. After your committee has reviewed the applications, you've done your up or down vote, we can provide a separate vote and we can go through each application and say whether or not there's a committee member who believes that an application has potential to be funded, have partial funding, and then we can work from there.
Okay, do we need a motion on that, to accept that?
I would look for a motion to approve staff recommendations
Okay.
as modified by the committee.
Okay, Timmy?
I would almost rather vote on whether we can partially fund it before we vote to fund it, because then, like, if there was a certain thing that I only felt like wanted to be partially funded and the rest of the committee said no, fully funded, I might not want to vote on that one.
So before we do the up or down vote on whether or not it actually applies to Measure Z, or do you want to, so when
No,
we,
I don't know, I don't think that would work either.
okay, so,
I don't know how to do that one.
okay.
Glenn?
Just help me understand, are we talking about a general rule that would be applied to all applications? Or are you talking about something that would be applied to an individual application based on the configuration of that specific, I'm just confused what we're talking about.
Let me see if I can summarize, just so we're all on the same page. We would start our process, vote if these applications fit the measure. At that point, we would go, before ranking the applications, we would go through each one and says, does this application, is this a potential for partial funding? That would be a yes/no vote. After that vote, then we would go through, we would find a way to go through and say, okay, is it 90%? Is it 85%? Is it, and that we would do that for each application. And then we would, based on that, rank the priorities. Is that correct?
That's the process I'm envisioning, yes.
Thank you.
Does everybody understand that? Okay, does anybody oppose that? Do we need to make a motion on that? No?
I would look for a motion to approve staff recommendations as modified by the committee during our discussion.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Is there any public that would like to comment on that? Tracy? No? Anybody in the audience? Any board member? Okay, I call for a roll call vote.
Sure, can I just, so, Mr. Cole, I know that you made the motion. Where was the second? Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and go through a roll call vote. Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. Trent?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Sheriff?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer?
Yes.
Ms. Long?
Yes.
And Ms. Bronco?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Motion passes 9-0.
Okay. So do you want a motion to accept the application as amended?
We just made that motion.
Is that the one? Okay. Just want to make sure because there was all that discussion. All right. So the next thing on the agenda is the G2, review of the Measure Z Ad Hoc Committee meeting discussions regarding the county dominance of fund and the CAO presentation to the BOS at the 2023 budget hearing. Glenn, I think that was your agenda item.
Before I get into the substance, I just want to make a little comment about intent. This discussion potentially could be sensitive, and I understand that, and I want to come at it from the most objective and practical way that I can. The reason I asked for it to be agendized is absolutely and strictly because of the fact that I'm confused about something that happened, and I'd like to bring some clarity and understanding to that circumstance. That is the totality of my intent, and you know, I have gotten a little heated about some things in the past, and I certainly want to have this discussion not occur in that heated way. My sole intention is to bring some understanding to something that I don't currently understand. So having said that, last year your committee appointed an ad hoc committee, which consisted of Mr. Cole, Ms. Trent, and myself, to try to address this situation that we had identified over a long period of time and so on. And so our committee held a series of 5 or 6, I believe it was 5 if my memory serves, committee meetings to try to address this topic. The first 3 were just our ad hoc committee, and then the last 2, we invited, or actually staff invited, county department heads to come and meet with us and discuss different options and so on. Early in the process, actually in the first meeting, it was pretty clear that one of the more substantial elements of our potential suggestions back to the whole committee would be doing something with the ongoing vacant positions that existed in the county side of the budget. Mr. Quincy did a bunch of research, and at the second meeting, he came and advised the ad hoc committee that he had identified 22 positions that were currently vacant on the county side of the ledger. Some of those had been vacant for more than a year. I don't know the breakdown, but a fairly substantial number had been vacant for a significant period of time. And we talked about the potential of trying to bring some balance back to the fund by having the county eliminate some of those vacant positions. And I'll speak very clearly and honestly about it. I was quite surprised actually by the relatively aggressive position Sean was advancing as far as a potential for the recovery of those positions. He even used the word clawback on a number of occasions, which is a pretty powerful term when you're talking about, basically recouping something that's been inappropriately, allocated and so on. So we had that discussion, I believe, in the second meeting. We had a very similar discussion in the third meeting. There was talk about the fact that 4 of those vacant positions were in the County Public Works Department for this brush clearing crew. And there was a desirability, since those positions hadn't been recruited, that they not be on the table, so to speak, as far as discussions were concerned. And the subcommittee agreed that that was an appropriate, circumstance. So at that point, we were looking at potentially recovery of 18 county positions. The discussions went back and forth, and the numbers ebbed and flowed. And in the 4th and 5th meeting, we met with department heads. And again, I was a little surprised how candid and open they were to the concept of potentially surrendering positions that they had historically been allocated. I think it's fair to say their consistent request to us is they wanted some projectivity, and they wanted to know where they were going to be. It was more important for them to have a known quantity than have an absolute number of positions. The district attorney conveyed that very openly, and a couple of the other department heads did as well. They wanted some consistency and some ability to forecast what was going to be available to them. So we left all that process after the 5 meetings, and I'll speak for myself. Mr. Cole and Ms. Trent can certainly speak for themselves if they had a different view, but I left those discussions thinking that we're likely to have a recommendation back to the Board of Supervisors of reduction of somewhere 12, 15 positions, something like that. Fast forward to the budget discussion where the CAO presented to the Board of Supervisors, and I was a little surprised to see that the recommendation from the CAO's office was for a single position, an IT position in the district attorney's office, to be terminated, and there was no suggestion of any other trimming, so to speak, of the county's side of the ledger. So my concern or my uncertainty is, I don't know if I am so ill-equipped intellectually to understand what was happening during those committee meetings, or if my memories failed me in my old age or what. But there is a radical difference in the tone and the substance of the ad hoc committee discussions and the recommendation that was brought by the CAA's office to the Board of Supervisors. And as I indicated in my initial comments, my sole intent here is to bring an understanding to what happened between the ad hoc committee's process and the point in time where the CAO made a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors.
A couple things. So the reference about clawback and something being inappropriately funded, I'll just fundamentally disagree with, respectfully. To say a position will be clawed back does not mean that it was inappropriately funded or allocated. It's solely in reference to bringing funding back to Measure Z. When we presented the budget in June, that was where our office could get to as far as finding positions that could be deallocated. If you'll recall, the Board of Supervisors appointed its own ad hoc committee to review the recommendations that your committee provided to them and come up with its own recommendations on how to actually get down to the split that this committee wants in terms of funding that goes to county departments and outside agencies. And when we came back to the board this fall, we presented that ad hoc committee's recommendations. That was not the county administrative office's recommendations. Those were the recommendations of the ad hoc, which was 2 of the board members there. When we identified those positions that had been historically vacant, We knew that our office can't unilaterally deallocate positions. We went back and we talked with departments about which positions are essential to their operations. And talking with those departments, there were a number of positions that they just identified that were essential to their operations, even though those positions have been vacant for a while. It takes a lot of time to fill vacant positions. And like I said, our office is not in a position to unilaterally, nor do we want to deallocate positions from departments without talking with them and finding a common ground for things. So that's what I'll say, what has happened since our Measure Z ad hoc committee met last spring.
Okay, Tammy had something she wanted to say.
Since we're talking about the ad hoc committee, I don't know if I misunderstand what an ad hoc committee was, but I was under the understanding that we would go and talk to them and then bring all of that information back to the full committee to discuss and make final decisions on. So I was kind of surprised when it went to the Board of Supervisors without coming back to our full committee. I feel that our full committee should be filled in on everything that was talked about, you know, by the ad hoc committee, but I don't know if that's what an ad hoc committee is, but that's what I assumed. I mean, I think that we should all be involved in, you know, a decision before it was presented to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, go ahead.
Just to kind of add my perspective, we put a lot of work into our ad hoc committee to try to develop conversations to bring back, in my point of view, to this committee. We were not an ad hoc committee to the Board of Supervisors. We brought information back to this committee, I believe it was in early May, late April, at which point this committee responded to what was presented. Now, I'm sorry, my memory is not 100%. I believe that there were things we discussed in committee that didn't make it to that discussion. But I also feel that the substance and the intention of that committee helped drive the conversation that then pushed the Board of Supervisors to create their own ad hoc committee. And that's where there was a lot of confusion that happened to me. Because initially, when I saw that committee, I thought, that's the committee that we had. I thought we were, you know, when did this become a Board of Supervisors ad hoc? And so I recognize that there were different intentions and different participants in both of those venues, and the names were very similar. I think my only hope is that as the Board of Supervisors continues to look at this fund, that we as a committee have a voice within their discussions. So if there's an ad hoc committee from the Board of Supervisors in the future on this topic, I would love to see a member of this committee, at least one member of this committee, participating at that level.
Do they still have their ad hoc committee for Measure Z? Is that still active?
No, so an ad hoc committee is different from a subcommittee in that a subcommittee is supposed to be an ongoing group that discusses an issue, lasts several years. An ad hoc committee is supposed to be a project-specific group that tackles the projects and then disbands. So that measures the ad hoc committee from the board. Accomplish their tasks similar to this Measure Z ad hoc committee accomplish its task. So that Measure Z ad hoc committee is no longer.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? Is that okay, Glenn? Did you get your answer?
Just make, again, strictly in the context of making sure that we have good communication. As I understood your comments, what you're saying is whatever position the CEO's office had floated, let's say, for lack of a better word, in the ad hoc committee meeting, I understood you to say that that position was modified between the ad hoc committee meetings and the Board of Supervisors meetings by the meetings with the department heads and their expression to you of the need to continue these positions, even if they had been considered for elimination at our ad hoc level. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Is there any more discussion on this? Go ahead, Sean.
My experience with ad hocs with the Board of Supervisors is the ad hoc fire committee, where it's a representation of fire chiefs and 2 supervisors. So I'm curious if that's similar to other ad hocs, if there are any other ad hocs with the Board of Supervisors for any other projects or issues.
Yeah, so the board's fire ad hoc is not an official designation any longer. We know the supervisors who are whose constituents are more affected by fire service, and so we regularly talk with those supervisors and hold meetings with them to talk about fire issues. But just specifically for those reasons and Brown Act reasons, there are a number of ad hocs that have come and gone over the years, and the fire ad hoc is one of them. Although we do know, like I said, which supervisors are whose constituents are more affected by certain fire service. That is whatever the topic of the day is.
Yeah, I guess this is a comment. We started this meeting with a celebration of moving this process and board or committee's role forward in a way we've been advocating for years. And we're ending it with a bit of frustration with communication and misunderstandings. So my question is more, if we do form an ad hoc committee in the future, probably better to have a very clear understanding of what that looks like, and so we're all on the same page. But again, I think we can all acknowledge that dynamics change very quickly, and this is a very complicated thing. So I think it's I really appreciate the open communication and the clear statement of intent and the very constructive way I'm hearing it being received. And I'm just using that as an opportunity to celebrate our cooperation, because, I mean, in government and in all our roles and all the people we're trying to serve with this committee, I think that is what we're trying to work for, is what the best outcome is and to make it work and what our value is. And I think we're proving it again. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I want to thank the ad hoc committee members, because I know you guys worked really hard and spent a lot of hours and time. And although it wasn't brought before us, I actually, in my own mind, was watching you during discussions about funding and stuff. I was kind of looking at what you were saying, because not that you had learned, and were bringing that forward, but I could tell by, what you were saying and how you were voting, that what had gone on. And I feel really good that we had 3 really good representatives, and I think that made a big difference to the department heads, that they may have a better understanding about Measure Z, and that we're not here just to cut them, or to vote on that. And I think that was a really big deal for us. It's a big plus, so thank you. Okay, is there anything else anybody would like to discuss on this? All right, well then we're at the adjournment, and I adjourn the meeting. Oh, Glenn.
Future agenda planning, could we speak about that? Is that all right with the way the agenda's set up or not?
Well, and I believe we tackled that with the agenda item on approving the application. This committee is going to come back on March 7th to receive the application and begin your deliberations. So we'll release the application hopefully tomorrow. Due date for the application is February 23rd, I believe is what we said. And then this committee, it'll take me a little bit to get all those applications together and make sure that they're complete. And we'll come back on March 7th to receive the applications.
Apparently I didn't communicate well. My thought was that we have a completely new process as a result of the board's decision, and that is the establishment of this reserve. So I would hope in the future we would establish an agenda item to talk about how we as a committee are going to, recommend that reserve be handled. And there's still some technical questions, I think, about how it's going to be developed and how it might be expended. So I'm just trying to promote a future agenda item that would address the establishment of the reserve and how we will utilize it.
Okay, we'll take that into consideration for the next agenda. Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.